Hello and welcome to the AI Show brought to you by Lenovo. I'm your host, Emily Barrett, and I'm thrilled to be your guide into the fascinating world of artificial intelligence. In each episode, we'll deep dive into the AI universe, exploring the latest innovations and the people behind them, and how these technologies are shaping our future. On this episode, we'll be joined by Richard Osborne, who I'll be discussing ethical AI with. So let's begin as we take you on our journey through the world of AI. So, Richard, I generally just start by asking people to introduce themselves. So do you mind just introducing a little bit about yourself, your background, and where you're from?
Oh, thank you. And hello, Emily, and lovely to be here. My name is Richard Osborne. I'm CTO of a company called Purple Transform. And my background is big IT, if you like. I worked for a big networking company called Cisco for 25 years in a variety of roles. But my last 10 years was working on innovation with the rail industry. And that's really what led me here. And eventually I left and went and did the exciting stuff.
So do you want to tell us a little bit more about the exciting stuff you are doing now, right?
Yes, certainly. So what we do in Purple Transform is we do CCTV and IoT analytics. So our world of AI is around machine vision. And the way we often put it, if you could have an unlimited amount of people watching all of the cameras you have in your infrastructure, what would you ask them to look for? Would you ask them to look for when someone trespasses on the railway tracks, in the rail scenario, or is a platform getting dangerously crowded? Or you might be in a hospital, and nurses have to go and check patients regularly to see if, they haven't moved for a while for sedentary behavior, which is very dangerous, or have dementia patients absconded. All of this takes people's time. And so what we're looking to do is use machine vision to look at cameras so that people don't have to. And we take away the mundane tasks, if you like.
So you're looking to make sure that people can have the information from as many cameras as possible and have that information in a consumable way that they can then action? Yeah,
that's exactly true. I mean, if you take the railway, for example, there are tens and tens of thousands of cameras across the railway. A single station, such as Leeds or Manchester Piccadilly or London Euston will have, maybe 300 or 400 cameras. And they don't have people who can sit there and watch all these cameras all the time. So, if someone does step down and on the railway tracks, which does happen a lot more than you might think, they might be trying to avoid paying the fare, they might have just fallen off, they might have had an accident, and cameras will be monitoring that, but no one is monitoring the cameras, So that's what we're here for, is to use AI, using machines that never get tired, if you like, to monitor those cameras, to detect these kind of events, and then get that information to someone who can actually intervene.
So you aren't looking, this is just a clarity point for me, really. So what you're not looking to do is then have a machine make a decision around what the next step should be. You're just looking to consolidate and serve that information to a person.
That's absolutely the case. We have a big focus on what we call ethical AI. Mm-hmm. And for us, one of the main things about being ethical is about not replacing people. You need people in that decision path. There might be some things like you're counting people, for a statistical analysis, and we don't need a person to check that. But if you're going to make a decision, a safety decision, is there someone who might get hurt? Might we need to stop a train? Might we need a nurse to go and intervene? You really want to have the person in the decision path. And there are two really good reasons for this. Is one is machine vision is never perfect. When we train a model to detect something, say a person or an abandoned suitcase, we're never ever 100% confident. In fact, you always, when the machine vision model detects something, it always gives you a confidence score, and you never see 100%. So you can never be sure. And the second thing with AI is the whole thing with AI is as a machine learns itself how to detect something, and we don't know how it's learned that. We know, no one knows really what did the machine decide are the attributes of something that says, right, I know that's a suitcase because it looks like this, So It'd be very hard to stand up in court and say, well, we automatically intervened and someone got hurt because a computer made a decision. So what we're about is about doing the boring stuff, if you like, looking at the camera all the time to look for people, never be completely sure, but then what we can do is we can say, Mr. Policeman or Mr. Operator, we think we've detected a person in a sensitive area, and here's the image, you make a decision.
Okay. So I guess this is, you've obviously come from a rail background, so there are multiple different use cases for rail that you can use this for, but I imagine it applies across all industries where you've got cameras anywhere,
Absolutely.
right? And cameras are such a universal thing now. So when you're talking about using these cameras, do they have to be special, high quality cameras, or can people just use what they've got in place now?
No, I mean, you can deploy smart cameras and that will make it a bit easier. But no, absolutely. Our focus is on using your existing infrastructure. So taking the cameras that you have right now, we then take that video feed, if you like, into a compute box. And in that compute, we do the object detection, detecting people, detecting vehicles. And then we can then take that information and then turn it into intelligent information that's relevant to someone. So this is a person on a railway track. This is a person lying in a hospital bed that hasn't moved for 6 hours. This is a dementia patient who is exiting the hospital, or so there's a myriad of use cases. There really is.
Yeah, I was going to say there are more. I imagine we could probably spend a very long time just listing use cases.
Absolutely, yes.
Stuff. Because as you say, it's anything where you would want to be watching a camera all the time. So whether that is health and safety in a manufacturing plant, all the way through to is somebody on a railway track when they shouldn't.
Absolutely, yeah.
The use cases for this kind of technology.
There are a few key areas that we've found where we can have the most impact, if you like. So one is where there are real safety issues. So the railway is a really good example. Last year there were 256 people who died on the railway. And obviously there's a very human cost. But it is also a financial cost as well. The government have a value of prevented fatality of £2.1 million. So it costs the taxpayer around £2.1 million when someone dies on roads or on the railway, in terms of healthcare costs, in terms of the police time, in terms of delays. And so we should be thinking about this as not just a human outcome, if you like, but there is also a very clear financial case as well. So one thing is where you could have safety issues, like say in a warehouse where you've got lots of forklift trucks, or a port, or any kind of critical infrastructure that's out there. So wherever there's a safety outcome is one of the real key things. The other thing is where we can drive some efficiencies from better flow, if you like, of people, like airports and ports, railway stations, obviously, stadiums. And the third is where we can drive some operational efficiencies as well. So like, for example, on the railway, we're trying to combine, trespass detection where also we can reduce the amount of times people have to go and visit remote infrastructure because we're providing better monitoring for that infrastructure.
Okay, so it's not just a computer vision thing, you're also looking at monitoring of infrastructure. And are you looking at predictive maintenance as part of that as well?
Exactly. Yes, okay. Exactly. So, I know I've mentioned the railway several times, but they're trying to move from a model whereby I go and check that once a year, every year, to a model of as they put it, risk-based maintenance. So we only do maintenance based on where we know something has gone wrong, and that is creating a risk. And so it may be then we just go and visit it when we know something is degrading, and it would cause a risk. And so that way, there's better safety. They have less people walking trackside, but obviously it saves costs. And this would exactly relevant across utilities, hospitals, anywhere where you've got lots of remote infrastructure where that have to be checked on a regular basis.
Yeah, and I mean I think there's people are becoming more and more aware of the amount of checking of that infrastructure
Yes.
that needs to take place. I mean, as you say, you look at utilities, there's been vast amounts of publicity recently about water companies in particular and identifying maintenance that they need to be able to do
Yes.
to prevent burst pipes, leaks,
Absolutely.
all of those kinds of things that isn't necessarily happening as it might do ideally right now. So there's definitely a use case there for AI to be able to help some of those companies with what they're doing, right? So you've mentioned safety as being a big use case. What would you say the next use case that you'd look at for people would be if you've got a customer who's looking for a good return on investment? Safety is obviously number one, but what would number two?
Safety is number one, probably.
Mm-hmm.
Now, number two is where you have lots of remote infrastructure you need to monitor, like you said, with water companies. And sometimes it's a matter of combining sensors and cameras together. For instance, with water companies, they often have challenges where they might have a flow sensor and they know they can know what the water level is, and but then that's completely confused because there's a log there, and they think with their little laser sensor that the water level is a lot higher than it really is, and it's about to flood. Well, actually, if you combine that with a computer vision model as well, you can see, well, okay, there's actually a log that's causing this sensor disparity as well. So sometimes it's a matter of combining information. But I mean, to come back to, so, there probably are two key ones. A third one is around crime. For instance, at Reading Station, we've reduced bike theft by 72%. And that's working with the British Transport Police, because the challenge they had was when someone leaves their bike at the station, they go on in London at work for 9 hours maybe, and they come back, their bike's been stolen, and the police are left with 9 hours of footage to watch for their bike, which is just not possible. So they ended up not being able to investigate as many incidents as they would like. But if we can, we trained a model, we can't detect a bike theft because it looks very like someone legally taking a bike away. But what we can do is look for every time someone's taken a bike, and then the policeman only has to look at the 12 incidents where someone took a bike out of that rack. They've got 12, 30-second snippets of video to watch rather than 9 hours. And because of that, now they've made 30 in arrests in the first 5 months we put it in. So there's crime outcomes, but it really does come back down to, if you could have, an unlimited amount of people watching everything that's going on, what would you ask them to check for? And if we can take away that, the mundane tasks of people having to do that, constantly having to check patients, constantly have to, to check, safety within a warehouse to make sure that people in forklifts aren't getting in the way of each other. That's what we can use AI for. Take away the boring stuff.
And I guess one of the concerns that your clients might have is around privacy, right?
Yes.
Because if you're monitoring CCTV constantly, you're obviously recording images. Those images are being stored and being analysed, or analysed and then stored, dependent on which way around you do it.
Yes.
And there are obviously privacy implications for that. So do you want to talk a little bit around how you manage that?
Certainly, and that's a fantastic question. Yeah, thank you. And I mean, everybody has a big concern about privacy, but everyone has a big concern about GDPR and falling foul of regulations. And it's very important. It's very important that of two things really is that you can never track anything back to an individual. So if we create data, it has to be anonymized. It may be that we're understanding how crowded an area is, or how many people are crossing a line, so we can make judgments based on that. We might even look at things like demographics, what's the gender mix, what's the age mix. The important thing is never to track it back to an individual. But the second aspect of this, and as I mentioned, if we're going to have a human involved in the decision, we need to give them the information they need to make the decision. And when we're talking about vision, that's a picture, and pictures might involve people. So we're very careful to make sure that we redact any images that we deliver to someone to make that decision, if you like. So it may be you'd provide a link to the footage and they can go and get that off the camera, but then they have to be authenticated on that camera system via the same way they use at the moment. The challenge with that is that sometimes the person you want to make a decision, if you like, to intervene, doesn't have access to the camera system because of GDPR. So if we can take an image and we redact all the faces out, then we can deliver that image to someone and say, oh, crikey, that is a safety problem. I need to go and intervene. So, and this is how we've dealt with this issue, is how do we get the right information to someone, but we make sure that they don't end up with images they shouldn't have. And it's very much about taking away that personally identifiable information, primarily faces.
And I think that's really key here because you know, anytime you're doing any form of computer vision, you do have to make sure that you are doing that biometric, particularly facial redaction, so that you are in line with GDPR. And taking it even further, obviously we've got the EU AI Act coming down the road. How that's going to play in the UK, we don't know. Do you have a particular view on how some of that might end up being implemented?
So one of the things we're very careful on is face detection. And so face detection is actually really quite easy to do, but it's something that we've studiously avoided to now. And one of the things that you really like to use face detection for sometimes is around tracking people. So when say you identify someone who's been involved in a criminal activity, once they go out of the camera frame, you really like to know if they've gone into the frame of another camera. And but to do that using personally identifiable information like a face, you start to get into areas which are not very ethical, should we say. So there's a technology called generative AI, which is very much where our focus is now. So I could, say it was Emily, I could describe you and say, well, Emily's got black shoes on, and she's got black ties, she's got a brown dress on, she's got brown hair maybe. Now, that could be a whole load of different people. And so if I can then describe you in not one of those things, could say, well, that's Emily, then I can look for you on the next camera frame. And particularly if I have overlapping cameras, I could look at things like, your foot position, if you like, combined with that to say, oh, right, that must be the same person. But you're still object ID number 4321. You're not Emily, or you're not a face, if you like. So it's using generative AI and where we can describe someone in a much more ethical way is very much where our focus is.
Yeah, and that certainly sounds like a really sensible and solid way of doing it. So we've mentioned ethical AI a couple of times now. Do you want to talk a little bit around how ethical AI is one of those things that can mean different things to different people, right? So do you want to talk a little bit around how you define ethical AI?
Yeah, so I mean, much along some of the points I've already touched on. I think, number one, we don't take the human out of a decision. So this isn't about replacing people's jobs, if you like, with computers. This is about monitoring the things that there's no way on earth you would have time to monitor. So the tens of thousands of cameras you might have on a railway track, level crossings and foot crossings and in stations no one has the time to look at. It's about monitoring those. So we're not replacing anybody in terms of people's jobs. We're about monitoring the unmonitorable, if you like, and then getting a person to make a decision. So ethical for us is number one. It is about not trying to replace people's jobs, but it's about improving things like safety, improving efficiency by monitoring the stuff you just don't have time to. And second, involving someone in that decision. And then the third is about making sure we're, not because of GDPR regulations, but making sure that we can be ethical to say we can never use this information, if you like, to infringe on an individual's privacy.
Okay, and
they're the three things for us, really.
It sounds like you've had a lot of time to think this through, and really arrive at those three key tenets for you as a business.
Absolutely,
right?
absolutely.
There are businesses out there and people out there who would think that actually AI is going to replace jobs, and there is potential for it to in some of these areas, maybe potentially less where you're looking at in terms of rail with computer vision. How do you address those challenges in terms of people's reluctance to adopt AI because they're worried about how it might impact people's jobs?
We haven't had a lot of reluctance, to be honest. We have other challenges, so obviously in an adoption, but I think starting with the message of being ethical, if you like avoid some of those challenges. And I honestly think there's more challenge within the press, if you like, about what people really think about it than when you actually get to talk to people. Funny enough, a colleague and I went to a nursing conference, and we went into that being very, very careful about what we said about cameras and so forth. But when you actually talk to nurses, they're much less bothered about having cameras infringing their privacy than they are in patients being abusive towards them. And patients being abusive towards other patients as well. So we even had one nurse saying, I think we should have cameras in all of the toilets. Actually, when you actually get to talk to people, they're much more focused about doing their jobs and feeling like they're doing a good job. And, if you work in a hospital, if you work on the railway, what plays on your mind is if I miss a trespass incident, there's children playing on a railway track who might lose their lives. That's what they're worried about. Nurses are worried about, having abusive behaviour that towards them and no one knows about it, or patients that they didn't have time to monitor maybe, and didn't realise they hadn't moved in 3 hours. So all of these things we've found, that's what people are really concerned about. And maybe privacy is a bit... I don't really want to say privacy is overrated. I think when you actually get to people, they're much less concerned about that. But we need to be very focused on making sure we don't infringe it, and we put the technology in place to help people do their jobs and help it doing better, and take away all the boring stuff that they don't have time to do, and so they can get on with what's really good about their work and not worry about all of that. But at the same time, make sure we manage the privacy concerns, but at the same time, not be scared off by them.
Yeah, and I think that's so important because, I think when you're talking to people who are out there on the front line with a job to do, they are always going to be interested in things that can make their lives easier and make their jobs better. And certainly in areas where you're making life and death decisions on a daily basis, anything that can help you with that, I think is always going to be welcomed with interest, right?
Yes.
But we have a responsibility to make sure that we are protecting people's data as well. But we need to make sure we're doing that so that the people using it don't have to worry about it, right? It should be something that technology companies just do by default, right? So you mentioned that privacy isn't one of the challenges you face, but you do face other challenges. Do you want to talk a little bit around the challenges that people tend to face when they are looking at these kind of technology rollouts? Yeah,
so I came from Cisco, big IT company, and largely what Cisco provides is a way for all your laptops to work on a wireless network, or your data center to run efficiently. And every organization knows they need one of those. You never go in there thinking, I don't think we need a wireless network. But what we're doing now is we're putting systems in place that people don't have at the moment. So a lot of the challenge we have is, that we absolutely should be doing that, but we don't have a project for that, and we don't have an assigned budget for that. And so a lot of the challenges we have is customers absolutely generally get it and think, we absolutely have to be doing that. We must think about that next year, when we can assign some budget to it. And so, for us, it often is very important to get up to much more senior decision makers, the sort of people who can make that budget happen. So they're the challenge we have. You're from a sales environment, so you'd know this very well.
Yeah, I was going to say there are challenges that resonate with me. And I think it's one of those things where you have to make sure you're talking to
Yes.
to the right person when you're talking about this kind of thing, because otherwise, if there isn't budget available, that's it.
Exactly. And just to add, and it's the old adage of people, process, technology. So sometimes the technology is the easy bit, as it always is, and there's one thing being able to detect something, and there's another thing having someone who will actually go and deal with it. And too often, we might talk to a customer and they say, "Oh, we really need to know this," and then when you show them a way they could know it, they were like, "Ooh, okay, right now we have to do something about it." So it's always being conscious of the people and process aspects is very important. And whenever you think about, if customers out there, if you're thinking about using AI technology, to improve people's lives, to make things better, and we have to also think about, well, okay, so how, having the human in that decision make, who is that human, and what are they going to do about it is very important.
Yeah, I think that's so key, because when you're into technology, you can get wrapped up in that technology piece, but there is a human here at the end of the day who is having to make those decisions, and the reason why on the whole we do this is to improve that human's life, or a number of humans' lives, right? So do you want to talk a little bit around how you do this, right? You've talked about some of the things you can do, some of the things you can detect. We've touched on not necessarily needing to upgrade all of your CCTV cameras, which honestly is the first question I often get asked is, am I going to have to upgrade all my CCTV cameras? No. So that's the first question answered. But how does it work?
So it's very important to look at this. This is not something that you can go into a customer and say, well, can you buy one of these, and off you go. It has to be something that you work together in partnership, and we work on those people and process aspects collaboratively, and think about a project doesn't have to just fund the technology. It has to think about how is it implemented in that organization, and sometimes for us is bringing the experience, if you like, as to how you might do that. But it certainly is making sure that we look at all of those aspects right from the start, and we don't get tech in there and then mistakenly think about that later. And of course, that's very much about involving everyone in those decisions, involving the people whose lives you're impacting, if you like, and whose jobs you're impacting, involving them and making them feel that they're part of that decision. They're part of choosing the technology, choosing how it's implemented, and making it effective. Because at the end of the day, they're the important people, of course. So, and that none of that is easy, but all of it is very, very important, because we're all about achieving the final outcome, not just selling some tin, if you like.
Yeah, and I think that's, again, you've raised a really good point there around making sure that what you put in is actually usable and is used, because having this capability to see everything all the time, you need to make sure that it's actually being presented in a consumable way. Make sure that the people who are consuming that data know what they're being presented with, and know things like it isn't always 100% accurate, and that they've got all of that information available to them, so that they can then make an appropriate decision to drive the outcome.
And we have a massive focus on usability, if you like, and on the user interface. Like probably our primary user interface is the mobile app. And to take a good example, at a major UK station, I should probably say, they've had a challenge with detecting abandoned luggage. They have an audit each year, twice a year, where someone comes along and leaves a bag, and they it's their responsibility to spot it, and frequently they haven't. And so what we're doing is we're looking for that abandoned luggage, but it's quite a difficult thing to be completely sure of, because in a busy concourse, there's always people walking past bags, and do they own it or do they not? So if you can never have that 100% confidence. And so it's how do you get that information to a member of staff that they can quickly glance at that, quickly see what bag we're talking about. It's just over there, or I'll keep an eye on that one. rather than some kind of alert that was like, well, I don't know which bag you mean, and I'm going to have to spend 10 minutes searching for it. So if you can make sure it uses as little of people's time as possible, then you can make these things usable. And so the user interface is if anything, our biggest focus of all.
Yeah, and it is, as you say, technology is a tool that we should be using to make people's lives better. It's not, it's great that we can also play with it, and it's a lovely, shiny thing. But unless it's usable, it's pointless. Yeah. Right? So that is so important.
And in our world as well, this is very much as well defined on you can only cry wolf so many times. So I had a route crime person on the railway, not so nicely referred to these systems as bunny cams, as she put it, because every time there's a bunny, it sets it off. So we've had a big focus. We've had the bunny cam problem as well. We initially deployed cameras where magpies were a big problem. It's thinking magpies are people, and you can only send alerts so many times that is wrong before people start ignoring it. Yeah. So what we do now that is quite innovative is whenever we detect something on the edge, because when you're running that object detection on the edge, whether it's a smart camera or it's an edge computer, you've only got so much processing power. And so whenever we detect something, we then take that picture, we send it up to the cloud, we reanalyze it with a much, much bigger model. Mm-hmm. And when you're talking models with machine vision, they're generally based on the accuracy has improved the more images you feed it.
Yeah.
And so for people detection, you've got these massive crowdsourced models that have had hundreds of thousands of images that are very accurate, but take a lot of processing power. But if all we're doing is now we're analyzing one image, we can then recheck it and make sure it really is a person, if that's what we're looking for. And we can add other contexts, Are they wearing PPE? Are they wearing, orange, all orange? In which case, they might be an engineering worker, For instance, like again on the railway, we've had a lot of problems with reflections in trains and people seen in train windows. Mm-hmm. So is there a train there as well? In which case we can negate it, and that way we can remove the false alerts and make sure that we have the highest level of accuracy we can have before we ask someone to look at a picture and intervene. Because what you want is 90% of the time they look at that picture, that really is an event, and only 10% of the time it's not. And that value would change depending on the use case, obviously. But yeah, so this is one of the ways we've had to innovate, but it's also one of the things that really differentiates us now.
Yeah, I was going to say, because there are lots of computer vision platforms out there.
Yes.
Right? So understanding how you differentiate from other people is super key here. But hearing that you have recognised that you can only cry wolf so many times, that if people get notifications all the time, I mean, I'm as guilty as anybody. My phone goes off and I just ignore it, because I get hundreds of notifications from whatever application it is on a daily basis. Yeah. And there is sometimes, as a human, you are presenting with too much information and more information than you can process. So it's, as you say, making sure that the information that you're being presented with is the right information that you need to make a decision.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, we sometimes see ourselves as we're the system almost that sits over the top. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of place for a lot of the smart camera systems are out there, and we've used smart camera systems, and we let them do the initial detection, if you like, and then we'll take that via an API and recheck it and provide then the user interface for somebody else who has to then go and respond to that. But we add that overlay that removes those false alerts. Yeah. Okay.
That's really interesting. And I guess that also comes back to the whole key messaging you have around ethical AI. Yes. And involving the human in that decision, because the human can only make that decision if they are given the correct information.
If they only, and also if they actually look at it, because they haven't got fed up with all the times it's told them something that's not true.
Yeah, exactly. Right, well, thank you very much for your time today. It's been a really, really interesting conversation. I've thoroughly enjoyed it and learnt a lot.
Yeah, thanks, Emily. I really enjoyed it. And all those years working at Cisco were fantastic. It was a great company, but it's really nice to be involved in something now where, you can feel sometimes maybe we have really we absolutely have saved some people's lives, and so you really feel you're doing something that's worthwhile. But so it's lovely to be outshared. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much for joining us today, and we'll see you for the next episode of the AI Show.